All right, for today's video review, we're going to be taking a look at Transformers Generations Fall of Cybertron Shockwave. He was part of the 2012 Generations toy line, and there was something going on at the time. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it had something to do with like the price of plastic or the availability of the type of plastic that Transformers figures used at the time, or maybe this was just around when they started switching to a different kind of plastic. But basically, it resulted in a couple of the toy lines having a kind of significant drop in quality that was pretty noticeable at the time. For example, like Dark of the Moon, that like the toy line of which was released in 2011, that definitely affected a lot of the figures there. Whereas, like, in terms of engineering and stuff like that, it was all comparable to what had shown up before. But in terms of like plastic quality compared to like Revenge of the Fallen, for example, like it felt like there was a pretty significant drop off, and that did end up affecting some of the Generations figures as well. Weirdly enough, it seemed to only be like exclusively the Fall of Cybertron figures, like especially like the Bruticus team had a lot of issues of that, where they had like just kind of thin plastic. Some of the figures used this like recycled plastic, like Fall of Cybertron Grimlock, that had like this kind of like texture, well, not texture to it, but this sort of like mixed look to it, which wasn't terrible. But basically a lot of the figures around this time had kind of like thinned out plastic, just pretty much just, it didn't feel like brittle or fragile or anything, just like a little bit less plastic than we were used to getting on figures at the time. And it's kind of funny because like I guess they ended up kind of sorting this issue out or reallocating, like budgets for particular lines or whatever, because like right after that we got like Thrilling 30, which was, a really, really good toy line and has some of the figures that are regarded as like really, really good figures. So like you'd have things like Fall of Cybertron Grimlock and Thrilling 30 Springer on the shelf at the same time, one of which was like, had kind of like flimsy, thin plastic, and the other one is regarded as like one of the best Generations figures ever, which was kind of funny. But yeah, it was a weird little time during, like Transformers collecting. But yeah, Fall of Cybertron Shockwave definitely falls into this category of like, he doesn't feel brittle or flimsy. He's just a little bit simple, and like a lot of the, he's got kind of like a low amount of plastic that, just results in him having kind of like skinny limbs in robot mode. But all things considered, he's not a terrible figure. He's decent, but it was something that was kind of going on at the time. He does have a couple bits in his alt mode of like sorta cheating, like the front of the cannon here doesn't actually become the front of the cannon in robot mode. It kind of like extends out a little bit. These end up being his robot mode heels, which is, yeah, I don't know if you can really consider that cheating or not. It's just kind of extending the cannon out a little bit, but for whatever that's worth. And then also the weird one is that he does have the top of his head peeking out on the top of his alt mode, even though this is not actually his robot mode head. And like, that seems kind of unnecessary. I can't even remember if the Fall of Cybertron Shockwave had the head peeking out. I guess surely it must have, but like, would anyone have been bothered if we didn't have like fake visible head syndrome in his alt mode? I don't know. It's a little bit weird to me, but it's a fairly ignorable detail, all things considered, but it is kind of a weird one. But yeah, he's got a decent alt mode here. It's one of the classic Shockwave alt modes of like, if you're not turning him into the laser gun, he's either just like a big flying cannon or a Cybertronian tank. And yeah, it's a cool alt mode. I remember in the game, he had this like neat sort of like spinning thruster section, which they didn't really replicate here. They kind of like made an elliptical version of it that's just like the combination of the two arms there. So it still has the general shape, but it doesn't spin or anything like that. But that's okay. Overall, I think it's still a pretty cool looking alt mode, all things considered. But yeah, in terms of comparisons in this mode, here he is with Kingdom. I almost said Kingdom Shockwave, Kingdom Sideswipe, just for the standard size comparison there, so you can see what it looks like with an average modern deluxe. And then for a couple other Shockwaves, here he is with Siege Shockwave, and why not with the Bumblebee Movie Studio Series Voyager Shockwave, just so you can see what it looks like with a couple of them. Obviously a lot smaller. He's a deluxe. He's the only deluxe Shockwave that I have, weirdly enough. But yeah, that's what they all look like together. I know I was complaining about him a lot in his video, but I've really been grooving on this figure. He's a lot of fun. He's got a very satisfying transformation. See, he's a fun toy. Not without issue, but he's pretty cool. Anyway, yeah, to get onto transformation, like I said, he's pretty simple. He's got a couple neat things going on, but First thing I usually start with is taking the thruster back here and just untabbing it. These will be his arms. You just have to untab these from each other and just kind of extend them down like this. And then you want to take these pieces and just sort of rotate them out to the side like that. You can take the wings and just fold them up like that so they'll end up on his back. You want to untab the legs here from the from each other, I guess, and then they kind of wrap around the gun here, and then you want to bring this bit up just so you can kind of untab the cannon and put it off to the side. Then you want to take these panels on the legs here, and they sort of untab and just rotate down to just like slightly shift the mass from his upper leg to his lower leg, and then you just flip down the feet. Like I said, fairly simple. It's not doing a lot here to reshape a whole lot of things, but it's not always necessary. And then the kind of fun part of the transformation is you take this bit, and like I said, this is not actually his head because this whole thing is upside down, and you flip it around like this, and when you tab it into place, it springs up his head, which is pretty cool. And then you lock that in just by locking the shoulders into place. And then for both of his arms here, you can rotate them down and then flip out the robot mode hand. They are, like a lot of Shockwave designs, they are symmetrical, so you can flip out both hands if you want to, which is nice because like he did spend the first part of the Fall of Cybertron game with both of his hands. But what you can also do is take the weapon here, and there's a slot right there on his hand. I think you can do this on both sides, surely. Yeah. You can fit it on both sides because it's using, it's not using the tabs that they use to actually plug together. It's just using a separate slot there. But you can kind of clip it onto his arm here to give him his gun arm. And that's a really good way of doing it. It definitely clicks into place pretty, satisfying. But yeah, there we have Fall of Cybertron Shockwave in his robot mode. And yeah, he looks pretty good. Like I said, he's definitely a little bit skinny in robot mode. Like you can see, especially in his legs, it's just like there's not a lot of mass there, which, the War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron, oh my gosh, words, Fall of Cybertron designs had kind of like bulky robot mode designs, so it doesn't totally work super well, but it's still a decent looking Shockwave. He doesn't look that weird being a skinny figure. It's just not super accurate to like what he looked like in the game, but the rest of the design is pretty good there. It's got the nice pink light piping for his chest and eye there. I'm always a proponent of yellow eye Shockwave over, pink or red eye Shockwave, but still looks pretty decent. In terms of articulation, the head is just on a swivel, so it can rotate around like that. No up or down movement. I mean, you can kind of spring it down a little bit if you want, but I don't know what that's really worth. The shoulders here are on swivels at the shoulder, and then they can hinge out to the side. He also has this separate joint for transformation, which can kind of like bend in, which can be, kind of useful-ish for some poses where he's like crossing his arm in front of his chest there. And then he's just got a ball joint at the elbow, which gives him a bicep rotation, as well as a little over 90 degrees of bend at the elbow. Nothing at the waist, which, this is, again, like the engineering was a little simple around this time. That part of the transformation is like pretty untouched. So like there definitely could have been, but there isn't, but whatever. His hips are on ball joints, which can go forward and back and out to the side. He does have a thigh swivel pretty much right above the knee with this mushroom peg here. He's got about 90 degrees of bend at the knee, and then the feet can kind of tilt down for transformation, but it's a loose enough joint that is like, it's not really all that useful. You can kind of get it into a pose like that, but I don't think it looks like particularly good. And then the weapon also originally did have a gimmick where you could kind of take off the barrel, and he's got like a triple barreled like gun underneath that, so you could kind of do a little bit of versatility in terms of like what arm he has, like you could in the game. It was kind of loose on mine that would just always fall off, and I didn't really care about that gimmick, so I just glued mine in place. But notable that the figure did originally have that feature. And yeah, I think, like, let me look at the inside. I can't remember if you can actually have him just like hold this as well if you want, or have other figures hold it. I can't totally remember. Oh, now it's like really stuck on there. Yeah, it does have a peg. Yeah, so you can just have him hold it if you want, or have other figures hold it. I think it looks a little bit silly like that, but you can do it. I just think it's really satisfying how well that kind of like clicks onto the arm. But yeah, no, it's a decent gun design, all things considered. It definitely looks a lot like the one he had in the game. But yeah, in terms of comparisons in this mode, just for the standard one, here he is with Kingdom Sideswipe. So you can see he's pretty much like an average height deluxe, but in terms of mass, he's like definitely pretty skinny in a lot of his in his limbs there. And then here he is again with Siege and Studio Series Shockwave, so you can see what he looks like with the two kind of Voyager-esque versions there. And yeah, he's a good Shockwave, all things considered. Not my favorite of the ones we've gotten. I definitely A, prefer Shockwave at the Voyager scale, and B, this was around the time where, you know, Generations figures were suffering a little bit. Weirdly enough, it was like mostly just the Fall of Cybertron figures, except for like Kickback, who felt great. But yeah, I don't know. It was a weird time, but and then he also does have a peg on his back here if you want to just like store the gun there and have him have you know, two hands. So it's nice for that to be an option there. But yeah, he's decent. I remember at the time I really wanted this figure just because like this was before we were really getting like a bunch of G1-esque good Shockwave designs. Like before that, the only one that was like really a decent stand-in was like Shock Blast from Energon, which had like the huge arm that was like as tall as he was. But yeah, no, it was nice to actually get like a Generations Shockwave that looked, you know, even moderately like his G1 version. So he was a fun figure at the time, but was quickly outclassed by some other better Shockwaves in the near future. But yeah, he's fun. Just, you know, kind of low quality in terms of like the plastic, and it shows a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to him. If you enjoy my videos, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I do reviews every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. And without further ado, here we have Transformers Generations Fall of Cybertron Shockwave.